A Spartan mother once told her son before battle, "Come back with your shield or on it." But what's truly chilling is that she wasn't exaggerating. She literally meant it. In Sparta, a man who lost his shield in battle was disgraced. If he returned home without it, he would be shunned by his family and his city. In their eyes, he would have been better off dead. Why did the Spartans hold such a brutal standard? What made an entire society value death over dishonor, to the point that retreat, even in the face of certain destruction, was unthinkable? Today, we'll uncover the dark psychology and relentless social machinery that forged the Spartan mindset. We'll see how these warriors were shaped from childhood, how cowardice was punished more harshly than defeat, and why it was the women of Sparta who ensured their sons would rather die than flee. To understand why Spartans never retreated, we must start at the very beginning, when they were just children. In Sparta, childhood ended at the age of 7. Boys were taken from their families and enrolled in the agoge, a state-run military training system unlike anything the world had ever seen. The agoge was not just about learning to fight. It was about reshaping the mind, body, and soul, molding boys into perfect soldiers with unbreakable discipline and loyalty to the state. In the agoge, harshness was the rule. Boys were deliberately underfed, forced to steal food to survive. Success wasn't in the act of stealing, but in doing it without getting caught. If a boy was discovered, he wasn't punished for theft. He was punished for failure. This lesson was drilled in from the start. Weakness, failure, and fear were more shameful than hunger or pain. The training was merciless. Older boys and instructors would beat younger recruits, not as punishment, but as a test of endurance. The boys learned to endure pain without flinching, without complaint, without a sound. To show fear or to cry out was to fail. Plutarch, the ancient historian, tells the story of a Spartan boy who, having stolen a fox, hid it beneath his cloak. The desperate animal gnawed through his stomach, but the boy remained silent. He died rather than reveal his fear or pain. This was the measure of Spartan resolve. Pain was nothing. Shame was everything. But the most insidious rule of the agoge was unspoken. Never show fear. Not in the face of pain. Not before an older, stronger boy. Not when bloodied or broken. Fear was weakness, and weakness was a fate worse than death. By the time these boys became men, the idea of retreat, of self-preservation at the cost of honor, was unthinkable. It wasn't just discouraged. It was programmed out of them. The agoge was not just a school. It was a crucible. Only the strongest, most disciplined, and most loyal survived. But the conditioning did not end when the boys became men. In fact, the greatest pressure came from the society they returned to. Imagine, for a moment, a Spartan warrior who, in the chaos of battle, throws down his shield and flees. He survives, but now he must return home. In Sparta, such a man was marked as a tresantis, a trembler. This wasn't just a name, it was a sentence. The tresantis was cut off from public life. He could not hold office, could not eat with other citizens, could not marry. People would turn their backs when he passed. Even his own family would disown him. He became a ghost in his own city. The punishment for cowardice was so severe that modern psychologists are stunned by its effectiveness. The tresantis was not simply shamed, he was erased. The only path to redemption was to die courageously in battle. Only by facing death head-on and meeting it with honor could a tresantis reclaim his place in society. For a Spartan, death was not the ultimate price. Living in disgrace was far worse. This social machinery ensured that the fear of shame outweighed the fear of death. Retreat wasn't an option, because survival after shame meant a living death. The message was clear. Better to die on the battlefield than to return home a coward. The ultimate example of this ethos was the Battle at Thermopylae. The story is legendary. King Leonidas and his 300 Spartans making their last stand against the Persian army. But the reality is even more telling. Leonidas and his men were not simply making a heroic gesture. They were following the law of Sparta, which dictated that a king could only retreat if the gods gave a clear sign. No sign, no retreat. To defy this law was to defy the very foundation of Spartan society. At Thermopylae, Leonidas received a prophecy. Either Sparta would fall or a Spartan king would die. He chose his own death to save his city. When the Persian ambassador demanded the Spartans surrender their weapons, Leonidas replied, "Come and take them." This wasn't bravado. It was the only answer possible within the Spartan code. Retreat was not just forbidden, it was inconceivable. But what happened to those who survived Thermopylae? 2 Spartans missed the final battle due to illness. When they returned to Sparta, one hanged himself in shame. The other spent the rest of his life seeking a heroic death in battle, desperate to erase the stain of survival. This was the power of Spartan conditioning. To survive when you were expected to die was a burden too heavy to bear. Yet the true genius, and the true terror, of Spartan society lay not just in laws or punishments, but in the role of women. Spartan women were the psychological enforcers of the warrior code. They were not passive bystanders. They were the guardians of honor. A mother would give her son his shield before battle and say, "Come back with your shield, or on it." Not "come home safe," but "come home with honor," or not at all. Spartan women wielded the ultimate weapon, social and sexual rejection. A man who showed cowardice could not marry, could not find a mate, could not raise a family. In a culture where identity and worth were tied to honor and lineage, this was a devastating blow. Spartan women would turn their backs on cowards, refuse to acknowledge them, even in their own homes. Plutarch recounted the story of a Spartan mother who killed her son for desertion, saying, "I bore him for Sparta, not for myself." This was psychological warfare at its most sophisticated. Spartan women trained themselves to be strong, both in body and mind. They managed households, held property, and raised their children to value honor above all else. They were the first and last line of defense against cowardice, ensuring that no Spartan would ever want to return home in disgrace. So why did Spartans never retreat? It wasn't because they were born braver than others. It was because they created a society where retreat was psychologically, socially, and legally impossible. The agoge destroyed the fear of pain and death, replacing it with the terror of shame and dishonor. The community enforced a code that made survival without honor worse than death, and the women ensured that the next generation would carry the same unbreakable resolve. This understanding is something that even modern military psychologists are only beginning to appreciate. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the presence of something more powerful than fear. For Spartans, that force was the terror of shame, the certainty that retreat would cost them everything: family, honor, identity, and even love. But there's a lesson here that survives long after the fall of Sparta. We may not face the same brutal choices as those ancient warriors, but the principle remains. When the cost of giving up becomes higher than the cost of going on, humans find reserves of strength they never knew they had. The mindset that made Spartans unstoppable can teach us something about facing our own challenges, whether in business, sports, or everyday life. Spartans never retreated not because they couldn't, but because they created a world where they wouldn't want to. The strongest chains are the ones we forge in our own minds. When you decide that giving up is not an option, you unlock a level of determination that can carry you through any adversity. So, as you think about your own challenges, ask yourself, what is your shield? What is the line you will not cross? Where will you refuse to retreat? Find that point, and you'll discover the power of the Spartan mindset, the unbreakable resolve that comes from knowing the only way out is through. If this exploration of Spartan courage has changed the way you think about determination and honor, take a moment to reflect on your own life. Where could you use more of that Spartan resolve? Remember, courage is not about never feeling fear. It's about having something worth fighting for that is greater than fear itself. Whether you're facing a daunting obstacle, striving for a goal, or fighting your own battles, remember the lesson of the Spartans. The cost of retreat is sometimes greater than the cost of standing your ground. Choose your chains wisely. Let them be the chains of purpose, honor, and unbreakable determination. In the end, the greatest victories are won not on the battlefield, but in the mind.